Well, so the Rebbe continues that even the above explanation in the wisdom of the one who says Anon Nosiv Malka, the Yidden that choose that are Beicher Bakodesh Baruch Hu, it is because even though the hashpah is less, but that is a hashpah that comes bipnimius, that comes from kedusha, rather than getting from the hashpah from mokem hamovis v'hatuma, because hakol mischalfim seems to be still a logical explanation. The Rebbe says, since we're basing on the pasuk that the nafshi, that they choose the Eibishter because of the neshama, chelke havaya omro nafshi, there must be a reason, an inherent reason of that connection, not a logical. Let's look inside. Well, so we need to understand the lechaira, that it seems gam lebiur zeh, even according to this explanation, the choosing of the pikeach, of the smart one in the king, so we explain, he is not doing it for the benefit that will be to him from this, but rather because the advantage of the king, as we explained, because he wants the hashpah from the king. For that, why he is foregoing, and he gives up the lots of the flow of the hashpah that comes from the other side, or from the duchsin. So still, this choosing of the king is based on the intellect. Since they all change. And the king does not change. So that's why it's fitting to forego, to be mevater, because logically it is the king that he wishes to get the hashpah from. So it's fitting to forego on the lots of flow that comes through the officer, and to choose the limited flow that comes from the king. So that's a logical conclusion. Rebbe said, but from the pasuk, it's mashma that it's not a logical conclusion. Since the medrash ties this idea of anon nasiv malka, that I take the king im with the pasuk chelke avaya omron nafshi, my nefesh says chelke avaya. Mashma, it appears to say she Yisrael beicherim b'hakodesh baruch hu. This that the Yidden choose in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, umitzad haneshama, that is from, because of the neshama, the soul, shehi chelek havaya, because that is a part of Hashem, chelki havaya, shalamaylo ma'asechel, which is higher than the intellect. So it's not a conclusion that is based on the intellect, but rather this connection of the soul. The point of the explanation is the seichel ha'adam k'moy shehu mitzad atzmei machriach lirtzois rak bazeh shetoiv loy. The human intellect on its own forces to want only those things that are good for the person. This is the reason why the nations of the world choose the officers. Even though they can also understand this idea that the king is the main. The kulhu mischalfin umalko loy mischalfin. Everybody changes, but the king stays, doesn't change. So this is not something that they cannot understand. But the person wants only naturally what's good for him. Because they are an entity of an existence. They don't want to forego the benefits through that they receive from the officers. They don't want to give it up because naturally the seichel wants what's good for the person. That's what is the approach. If you are an entity, you looking to enhance your entity, your being. The fact by Yidden, there is that recognition that you must forego that benefit and their own entity and to choose godliness. So that taka comes because of the neshama, chelik havaya, the portion of havaya. Shebechiroso be'elikus hi bechira atzmis shelamayla mahasechel. The neshama's choice in godliness is a choice of the essence of the soul, which is higher than the intellect. Which means the bechira zu hiloi mitzad ha'ilu de'elikus. This choosing is not because of the advantage of godliness, that the king doesn't change, and that's why there's an advantage to the king. But in the essence, and this impacts also their intellect. That also the intellect recognizes the mikivon she'elikus emes. So you have connection, the choice is made because the essence, not based on the logical, it's made essence, but then it impacts also the seichel, shagam ha-seichel makir, that also the intellect recognizes the mekivon she'elokusu ha'emes shachai v'kayim v'kiyum nitzchi, that since godliness is the truth, that he lives and is sustained in an eternal, sustained malka loy mischalef. So he needs to forego, logically explains that too, and to choose godliness. So basically, the Rebbe asked, it has to be more than just a logical, and the answer is yes, it's based on the bechira atzmis. But then that bechira atzmis that goes from the neshama impacts the intellect, so that the intellect also, that's what the Medrash says, that the benefit that the likus is the truth, and chai v'kayim lo mischalef, as opposed to the others, and therefore one needs to forego on his metzias and to choose godliness. And the Rebbe wants to say now that the fact that the etzem's haneshama's choice filters down to the seichel itself, that brings an advantage to the neshama even more than the choice that it makes on its own. It's an addition, the fact that its idea came down also into the intellect. Perhaps we can add through the fact that the choice of the neshama, which is higher than seichel, it extends and it impacts the seichel. That adds to it an additional advantage more than the neshama is on its own by having this higher level of the neshama impacting the seichel adds to the neshama. You will understand this by first introducing that which is explained in the Siddur. In the Brahmaschil, the Alter Rebbe Siddur, the opening Maimer Avodim, the Padre, that we used to be Avodim to Padre Mitzrayim, that's the Maimer there. So over there it discusses Binyan Hani Hashpo Hanim Sheches Lo'ivre Ritzoyne. How the flow from Hashem extends to those who violate Hashem's wishes. It's only in a by the way. It's as if one would be throwing something behind his shoulder. Doesn't really want to give it, just gives it behind the shoulder. It says over there, it's similar to a king. He makes a meal and a party for the great officers and the important servants. He spends a lot of money for that meal and the party. From the leftover of the meal, then also those of much less value will also receive the leftovers. As for example, Avodim, the slaves, and the maidservants who are behind the mill, meaning they sleep outside, they're a much lower level of slaves and maidservants. But also to the extent also the dogs will eat the bones that you throw below, you throw under the table, or you throw for sure, the king did not intend to spend money for them. And the fact that they get the flow from the leftovers. Even the leftover of the meal, it's a great fortune. It's expensive. So they get it by the way. The party is for the king, for the important, for the officers, for the important slaves. But the others get sort of by the way later on. And similar to this is in the Nimshal that the flow that goes to those who violate Hashem's will is only on a by the way. The way they get it is like by the way, like one who throws behind his shoulder. Has explained at length the matter of Mir. So the Rebbe says, so we have here two examples. In both cases, the Derech Agav we bring down about the servants and the dogs, and about those who are sitting by the table, we have officers and important slaves. The fact that what does he bring the two examples? That they get the flow only in a by the way, they don't sit at the table at the king's table. So he says two things. He says, one, the servants and the maidservants. Then we also have a klavim, dogs. And then you also have Shnei Dugmois Be'elu, Sheyoshim B'Shulchan HaMelech. We have also two examples with those who sit at the king's table. So you have Sorim Gedolim, Bavodim Chashuvim. You have these great officers and important slaves. So what is this for dargas? Who this fits the four levels in the nimshal. So darga achi tachtoino, in the service of Hashem, what would be the lowest level? Haim haklovim. Those are the dogs. That's the fourth, the lowest level. She'einam evdim es hamelech. They don't serve the king, and yet they want to gashmius, and then they wish for more physicality, more and more, without serving the king. As the Pasuk says, Haklovim azei nefesh lo yedu sova. The dogs are brazen of soul. They never satisfy. They don't know satisfaction. As much as you give, they always want. We can tie this thing about Klovim in that which we know that Kelev, the word Kelev is a Moloshin Kuloi Lev. He's all heart. Kelev is Kulev. The Teva HaOdam B'Toldosoi B'Teva Yitzirosoi, because the human nature as he was born and the nature, the way he was formed, Shahamoyach Shalit Alalev, you need to have the way the mind should be controlling the heart. But the one who is in the level of a Kelev, who we could say he is in the opposite extreme. The Lord Akshalev Shalit Al Hamoyach, not only is the heart dominating the mind, but it's even more than that. He's only a heart. There's no mind there at all. It's not only that his mind doesn't control the heart, the level of Kelev, but it is only heart. There's no mind. And therefore, calling Yonei. So what is this example? Metaphorically, what are we talking about? A person whose entire matter is Hulamailas Taivas Libai, is just to fulfill the desires of his heart. And higher than this Kelev level is the level of the lower level of the slaves. As he says, those servants and maidservants who are behind the mill. Shehem evdim es hamelach. They actually serve the king. Hello, shavidosam hurak hirak b'tzad ha'hechrech. They're only serving because they're forced into it. Mipnei eimas hakos hashevet. They're afraid of the bang of the stick. That's what heipech harotzin v'hatainuk shalahem. They're serving. This is contrary, opposite of what they want and what their pleasure. They don't really want this. They're forced. They're avodim because of the fear of the stick. The abdu befkeda nichalei. A slave wants to be hefker, irresponsible for anything, no restriction. That's what he's comfortable with an eved, and he is forced into the level of servant. That's called the servant of acharei harachai. Since their will and their delight is in the taivas of this world, and the reason they don't violate his blessed will is because they're afraid of punishment. So that's why they're situated outside of the king's table. As opposed to the important slaves, they serve the king with a want and with a yearning, with enthusiasm. Because although that mainly their avodah is based on accepting the yoke, that's why he's an eved. An eved means he accepts the yoke. Because ki yodua hachiluk bein ben le'eved, as we know, there's the difference between a son and a slave. The fact that a son does that the father wants, that's because of the love to the father. But the fact that the slave fills the master's wishes is in a way of accepting the yoke. So he's still an eved, and he does it in a way of Kabbalah soil, but yet he does the Kabbalah soil is with a desire and a yearning. They want to accept the yoke of the heavenly kingdom. And that's why they too, their place is at the table, king's table. But even higher than that is the officers. They have knowledge, they know how to run the government, the king, the kingdom. And therefore, therefore, many aspects of the kingdom in the running of the government, the running of the kingdom is conducted by them, by these officers. And they also have a grasping in the greatness of the king. And that's why they have a love to the king. And therefore, they're not just serving because of accepting the yoke, but also because of love. That's the fourth highest level, is the sorim, that not only do they serve with Kabbalah, so they also out of love. Within sorim, there is also many different levels. Over there, it is divided, generally speaking, into two categories: sorim stam, sorim gedolim. So we have the stam sorim. So in the Maimer, he talks about sorim gedolim, but there's also sorim stam, not sorim gedolim. So it turns out now we have three levels sitting at the table. You have the important avodim, and you have sorim stam and sorim gedolim. These three categories that find themselves at the king's table, which is the avodim chashuvim, the important avodim. You have the sorim, and then you have the sorim gedolim, the great officers. Heim behesem the gimel hasugim shebemedrash. This fits the three categories that the Medrash mentions. The duchasin, the iparchin is taratilutin. Shanimtsoyim yachad im hamelech. They are with the king. That means they're at the table. They're with the king. Kilushoin hamedrash. The Medrash says, "V'hoyu imoy." While the king came to the city, with him he had the duchsin parchin is taratilutin. That's the table of the king. This is similar to the important slaves and the officers which are found at the king's table. So based on this, we can say that even though we're trying to say over there that the other officers, the goyim, they choose or they take their nosiv, these istaralatutin, the duchsin, the parechin, but it also has dagam shakavana bepashas beduchsin v'chulu. Hilahayin sodim de noiga. This is referring to the 70 officers of noiga, as brought down earlier from the Maimorim. But yet, zeh shemedayik sha'amduchshin hoyu imay. He says that they were with him. Ubirdei lirames, that is in order to hint shemedaber kan, that he's talking over here loirak. Sorry, we're not talking just about the 70 officers, Shem Yesh Davar Bifnei Atzmei, which are an entity, something independently by themselves. Dugmas Avodim Abchusim Shemekoim Mechutz Shulchan HaMelech, and then we would be talking about the lower slaves who are like outside of the king's table. So we would be talking about the Noiga. We're talking about something which is not with Hashem. Lagam b'Malochim. But we're also referencing about the angels that are subjugated to godliness. They're with him. They're imoy. And even higher, b'sfiras da'atzilus. We're also hinting for the level of sfiras of atzilus. She'iyu v'chayoyi v'garmoyi chad. Over there, Hashem and his energy and the vitality and the kelim are one. So over there, Shem Tomidim HaMelech. So they are constantly with the king. So the Rebbe says, so now we're saying that these levels of the Duchsin are a high level. That's even the level of Atzilus. And we're not just talking about the Ayin Sorim, but it's a much higher level. And yet the Pikeach wants only the king, not even those higher levels. Now we can even understand the wisdom of the one that says, I'm taking the king. Because in addition that he doesn't want to receive the flow like the klovim, which is a totally level of outside, and not like the lower level of slaves they're outside of the king's table. Although the flow that goes to them is in a tremendous amount, he wants to be a table of kings. It's more than that. When he says he doesn't want the duchsin, is malachim, sfiris, the atzilus, he doesn't want malachim, and the sfiris, Ella b'hamelech, he only wants the king. Adon nasiv malko, I want to take the king. As the known teaching, Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, Pasuk on the verse, Tefillah la'oni ki yatov, Lifnei Havaya Yishbech Sicher, when the Ani prays, wraps around in prayer, it's before Havaya that he pours his heart out. That what he asks is that he should be able to reach the level of Havaya. He doesn't ask for anything that he should be able to pour his out before Hashem. For this, we need great wisdom. And that will be similar to the king of flesh and blood. Here is talking about Hashem. But just like by a melech, a king of flesh and blood, in order to go into the room in where the king finds himself, the leader is as Pnei HaMelech, and to see the king. He needs to go through many, many rooms. In each one of them, there is a precious treasure. There are those that once they see this precious treasure, which is in the outer room, they delight, with a very wonderful delight, and then they delay over there, they get caught up in that place. And there's others, there is also such a they delight going into an inner room. But it's only one who is a great wisdom. Gate imnit on hachashivas v'hayoker. He does not care about the importance and the preciousness shalahoin otzum than this tremendous fortune, which you can find also in the very inner room. He's almost by the king. There is a tremendous amount there. And all of his want and yearning, to go into that room, that small place with the king, and to see the face of the king. So that is a great level of wisdom, because that's something to give up even the highest of madreges, and to be smart enough to go into the kita, into the small room, and visit the king himself.